June 6, 1944, the Normandy coast of France. The sea is gray, choppy, and bitterly cold, as landing craft plow through the waves. Vomit is everywhere as soldiers are seasick, terrified. Just young men, really. Barely more than boys. Americans, British, Canadians, all packed tight shoulder to shoulder with equipment weighing them down. 60 pounds, 80 pounds, some even more. All of it waterproofed or supposedly waterproofed. Loaded and ready but scared beyond measure. The beach approaches through the morning mist. Through the spray, through the overwhelming fear. 5 beaches, 5 landing zones with code names that will soon become famous. Soon become graveyards. Soon become legend. Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Above them the sky roars with aircraft, thousands of them. Bombers, fighters, and transports form an allied air armada, flying unopposed because the Luftwaffe is broken, destroyed, gone. Air supremacy is total, complete, and overwhelming, but it won't save the men on these beaches. It won't stop the bullets or clear the bunkers. They must do that themselves, with their blood, with their courage, with their lives. Behind them stretches the English Channel, miles of water crossed in darkness by the largest invasion fleet in history. 7,000 ships including battleships, cruisers, destroyers, transports, and landing craft stretch from horizon to horizon, impossible to count and impossible to stop. This unstoppable force is about to meet an immovable defense, and something must break, someone must die. And many will die this day on these beaches during this invasion. The landing craft approach the obstacles. The beach obstacles, the German obstacles, underwater stakes, hedgehogs, Belgian gates, all with mines attached and designed to rip boats apart, sink craft and kill soldiers before they even land. Some craft hit them and explode, disintegrate, as men are thrown into the water. Weighted down by their equipment, they can't swim, can't surface, and they drown before reaching the beach, before firing a shot, before even seeing the enemy. They are the first casualties of the longest day. The ramps drop and machine guns open fire instantly. German machine guns, MG-42s firing 1,200 rounds per minute. Hitler's buzzsaw tearing through the packed landing craft, through the exposed soldiers, through bodies. Men fall immediately in their first steps, their first seconds, dead. The water turns red with blood as bodies float and sink while more keep coming. The orders are simple. Get off the beach, get to the seawall, get inland, or die trying. Most will die trying. This is D-Day, Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy where the liberation of Europe begins. Here, today, June 6, 1944. This date will be remembered forever as the day that changed everything, when Allied forces returned to France, when Germany's Atlantic Wall was breached, when the end began for Hitler, for Nazi Germany, for the Third Reich. But first, they must survive the beach. To understand D-Day, we must understand what came before it. June 1940 saw France fall in catastrophic defeat as the German blitzkrieg proved unstoppable. The French army was destroyed. The British army evacuated at Dunkirk in a miracle escape, but a defeat nonetheless. Hitler now controlled Western Europe while Britain stood alone, isolated but defiant, surviving but not winning. Churchill promised a return to France, promising we shall liberate Europe, we shall never surrender. These were brave words, but how could they be achieved? Britain was weak with an army evacuated without equipment, a navy that was powerful but stretched thin, and an air force fighting for survival in the Battle of Britain. With invasion threatened, returning to France seemed impossible. A distant dream, a desperate hope. December 1941 changed everything when Pearl Harbor brought America into the war. Hitler's declaration of war on America was a mistake, perhaps his worst and most fatal mistake. America's industrial might, unlimited resources, and massive population were now fighting Germany. Eventually, when they were ready, When trained, when equipped, they would be coming. Inevitably and unstoppably. Stalin demanded a second front immediately, because the Soviet Union was bleeding with millions dead. Whole armies destroyed and Germans deep in Russia. Leningrad was besieged, Moscow was threatened, and Stalin needed relief. He needed Germans fighting elsewhere, needed the Western Allies to invade now, today, yesterday. He demanded they open a second front to draw German divisions west and save the Soviet Union. Churchill resisted, saying they weren't ready yet, it was too soon, too risky. He reminded everyone of Dieppe in August 1942, a raid on a French port that became a disaster. Mostly Canadian troops were slaughtered on the beaches, with 2/3 becoming casualties in a complete failure. The lesson was learned that invading France was hard, very hard, and it needed preparation, planning, overwhelming force, and time. The Americans were impatient as General Marshall wanted an invasion by 1943 at the latest, but Churchill said no. North Africa first, then Sicily, then Italy, pursuing a Mediterranean strategy to wear Germany down, learn lessons, build forces, and gain experience. The Americans were frustrated but agreed for now, with a promise made that 1944 would bring France, Normandy, an invasion that was definite, final, with no more delays. The Tehran Conference in November 1943 brought Churchill, Roosevelt, and Stalin together as the Big Three to discuss strategy. Stalin demanded an invasion date, a firm date with no more delays and no more excuses. Roosevelt promised May 1944 in France, in Normandy, and Stalin was satisfied, pleased that the second front was finally coming to put pressure on Germany from both east and west, marking the beginning of the end. Planning began in earnest, actually starting in 1942 but accelerating dramatically, now that the date was set and the location chosen. Normandy was selected over Pas de Calais, despite Calais offering a shorter crossing. It was more heavily defended because the Germans expected it there. Normandy had lighter defenses, a longer crossing, but better beaches and better breakout opportunities. The decision was made for Normandy, Operation Overlord. June 1944. General Dwight Eisenhower was chosen as commander. As Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force. He wasn't an obvious choice, having never commanded combat, being more of a political general and staff officer. But he was diplomatic and got along with everyone. British, Americans, and Canadians all needed to cooperate, and coalition warfare required cooperation above all else. Eisenhower provided exactly that, making it a brilliant choice as he was the right man, in the right place at the right time. General Bernard Montgomery commanded ground forces as the British general, who was arrogant, difficult but also a brilliant tactician. He was experienced and successful, having defeated Rommel in Africa, and he would command all ground forces initially until the breakout when Eisenhower would take direct command. But for the invasion, for the landing, for the critical phase, Montgomery commanded as a detailed planner who was careful, methodical, and exactly what was needed. Admiral Bertram Ramsay served as naval commander, having organized the Dunkirk evacuation and proven himself an expert in amphibious operations. He planned Neptune, the naval operation for Overlord, which involved moving armies across the Channel, landing them safely, supporting them, and supplying them. This was a massive undertaking of unprecedented scale that Ramsay organized perfectly, brilliantly, and successfully. Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory commanded Allied air forces including bombers, fighters, transports, and gliders. Air supremacy was essential for bombing transportation targets like bridges and rail yards, isolating Normandy, and preventing reinforcements while also supporting the landing with close air support and bombing defenses. Lee Mallory delivered completely and overwhelmingly. The plan was complex with 3 distinct phases: airborne assault, dawn landing, and breakout. The airborne assault would go first on the night before, with 2 American divisions, and 1 British division dropped inland behind the beaches. Their mission was to secure the flanks, capture bridges, block reinforcements, and disrupt the German response. This was a dangerous mission in enemy territory at night, where many would die, and many would miss their drop zones, but it was essential, and had to succeed. Then came the dawn landing on 5 beaches with 3 divisions initially, and more to follow. The goal was to establish a beachhead, link up, push inland, break through the Atlantic Wall, and capture ports, especially Cherbourg. They needed ports for supply, for reinforcements, for sustaining the offensive, and everything depended on the beaches, on the first hours, on breaking through or dying in the attempt. The Atlantic Wall was Hitler's boast of Fortress Europe, being impregnable with thousands of bunkers, millions of mines, beach obstacles, artillery positions, and machine gun nests stretching from Norway to Spain. It was mostly propaganda, though, with some sectors being strong while Normandy was only moderately strong. It wasn't impregnable or unstoppable, being undermanned and undersupplied, making it vulnerable if hit hard enough, fast enough, and strong enough. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel commanded Army Group B, defending France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. When he inspected the defenses, he was horrified to find them inadequate, weak, and incomplete. He improved them dramatically with more obstacles, more mines by the millions, better positions, and better fields of fire. If he'd had more time, he might have made the beaches impassable. But time ran out in June 1944 as the Allies were coming, whether he was ready or not. Rommel knew the invasion had to be defeated on the beaches in the first day, in the first hours. If the Allies established a beachhead, then Germany would lose because their industrial might was too great, and their numbers too overwhelming. He had to destroy them at the water's edge in the landing craft, on the beaches before they could consolidate and break through. It was his only chance, his only hope, a desperate plan, but the only plan available. His superior disagreed as Field Marshal von Rundstedt commanded in the west with overall command and a different strategy. He wanted to let them land, let them advance inland, then counterattack with panzers and reserves in a mobile defense to destroy them inland rather than on the beaches. This was Rundstedt's way, the traditional way, the proven way. Hitler interfered as always, refusing to give Rommel divisions or give Rundstedt authority while keeping control for himself from East Prussia 1,000 miles away. He insisted on personally approving all armor movements, which was a fatal flaw that delayed decisions, prevented rapid response, and guaranteed confusion. This was typical Hitler, controlling everything while actually controlling nothing, and ensuring defeat. German forces were divided and weak, with many divisions being second-rate. The Eastern Front got the best troops and equipment while Russia bled Germany white, leaving France with leftovers. Old men, young boys, foreign volunteers, and Osttruppen, who were Soviet POWs that switched sides, made up unreliable troops with poor morale and inadequate equipment. Some good units existed like SS divisions and parachute divisions, but there weren't enough. Never enough. The intelligence war proved critical, as the Allies ran a massive deception called Operation Fortitude. They created a fake army in southeast England under Patton's command with fictitious units, dummy tanks, false radio traffic, and heavy bombing of Calais. Everything pointed to a Calais invasion, and the Germans believed it, mostly keeping strong forces at Calais, even after the Normandy landing, because they thought it was a feint, and the real invasion was still coming at Calais. Fortitude succeeded brilliantly and completely. German intelligence failed completely. as the Abwehr was compromised with most agents actually being double agents working for the British and feeding false information. The Germans trusted them, believed them, and based decisions on lies, on deceptions, on fantasies, never realizing the truth until it was too late. This intelligence failure became a strategic disaster. Weather became a critical factor in early June, as conditions were terrible with storms, high winds, and heavy seas. Eisenhower had to decide whether to delay or go, knowing that postponing risked security. The troops were briefed, knew the target and date, and couldn't keep it secret forever because German spies might learn, prepare, and fortify. They had to go soon, but the weather was awful and the landing could fail with men drowning or being slaughtered on the beaches. Meteorologists studied forecasts and identified a brief window coming on June 5-6 when weather would improve slightly. It wasn't perfect, but it was acceptable maybe. Eisenhower met with his commanders and listened to their opinions. Montgomery said go. The Navy said it was risky but possible. And the Air Force said conditions were marginal. Eisenhower decided alone, with this being his decision and his responsibility. He decided to go on June 6th at dawn in Normandy, and the invasion was on. He wrote a final message in case of failure, in case of disaster, taking full responsibility and blaming only himself. He put it in his pocket, hoping never to use it, then gave the order to execute Overlord. The greatest gamble in history began right then. June 5th evening saw troops boarding ships, landing craft, and transports already loaded and waiting for orders. This was it. Tomorrow, France, the invasion. Some cheered, some prayed, some wrote letters, their last letters maybe. Probably for some of them. They knew the odds and knew the dangers, but they were ready, trained, equipped as the best army ever assembled, and the most powerful force ever created. They were as ready as they could possibly be. Paratroopers loaded onto C-47s by the hundreds, packed tight with heavy equipment including weapons, ammunition, parachutes, reserve chutes, everything waterproofed. Their faces were painted with game faces on, as some joked and laughed with bravado, while others stayed silent, contemplative, and scared. All were scared but trained, disciplined, and ready. They were airborne, elite, the best of the best. And they would jump first to lead the way into darkness, into France, into history. Midnight approached as the first aircraft took off carrying pathfinders, who would land first to mark drop zones with lights and beacons to guide the main force. They jumped with France below, the enemy below, and darkness everywhere. Some landed safely and marked zones while others were captured, killed, or went missing. But enough succeeded with enough zones marked for the main force to follow. Hours on June 6th marked the main airborne assault, beginning with 13,000 American paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne and 101st Airborne jumping over the Cottonton Peninsula behind Utah Beach. Their mission was to secure causeways, capture Sainte-Mère-Église, and block German reinforcements in a critical mission that the landing in Utah Beach both depended upon. The drop became chaos, scattered and widely dispersed due to cloud cover, darkness, anti-aircraft fire, and evasive maneuvers. Paratroopers landed everywhere, miles from their drop zones, alone, lost, and confused. Some drowned after landing in flooded areas that Rommel had deliberately flooded as a defensive measure that worked too well. Paratroopers weighted down, couldn't swim, and drowned in just 4 feet of water, in terrible, helpless deaths. Others landed safely, gathered using crickets, which were toy clickers, making a click-clack sound to identify friends and avoid Germans. Small groups formed and moved toward objectives as improvised units with mixed companies from different regiments. But it didn't matter. They followed the nearest officer, fought the nearest enemy, and accomplished any objective they could. The chaos actually bred initiative, courage, and eventual success. Sainte-Mère-Église was captured early, as the first town liberated with an American flag raised. Paratroopers held it against counterattacks and against the confusion marking the first success and first objective secured. More followed as causeways were captured and bridges were taken while Germans grew confused. Reports flooded in claiming paratroopers were everywhere attacking everything in exaggerated reports. The paratroopers were actually scattered and disorganized, but the Germans didn't know that and thought it was a massive assault. They panicked, overreacted, exactly as planned. British airborne landed east of the beaches with the 6th Airborne Division having a critical mission to capture bridges over the Orne River and Caen Canal, known as Pegasus Bridge and Horsa Bridge. This was a glider assault with a silent approach and surprise attack, as 6 gliders landed near the bridges within mere meters in incredible accuracy, skill, and luck. The gliders crashed in controlled crashes as troops emerged stunned. Bruised but alive, they rushed the bridges as German guards were surprised in a brief firefight, before the bridges were captured intact and undamaged. This was perfect success with the mission accomplished within minutes, as the first Allied troops on French soil secured the first objectives and held them while waiting for seaborne forces, for reinforcements, for relief. Other British objectives proved harder as the Merville Battery with its coastal guns threatened Sword Beach and had to be destroyed. The mission went to Lieutenant Colonel Terence Otway and the 9th Parachute Battalion with a complex plan calling for a drop zone near the battery and an assault at dawn to destroy the guns before the landing began. Reality became chaos when Otway's battalion scattered with 600 men planned, but only 150 arriving at the assembly point, just 20% strength. Equipment was missing, including heavy weapons, explosives, and mine detectors, all dropped in the wrong location and lost. Time was short with dawn approaching, forcing a decision. Go with what you have or abort. Otway decided to go with 150 men against a fortified position, against terrible odds, against all hope. But they attacked anyway. The assault was desperate and bloody as they pushed through minefields, through wire, through fire with casualties mounting heavily. But they pressed on, reached the bunkers and engaged in close combat with grenades and bayonets in desperate fighting. They won, capturing the battery, though the guns were actually smaller than expected and less threatening. Still, the mission was accomplished, and the battery was silenced, making Sword Beach safe from this threat anyway. The cost was high with Otway's battalion shattered, but they were successful, heroic, and legendary. Dawn broke in gray, stormy, wet, and cold conditions as naval bombardment began. Battleships, cruisers, and destroyers fired on shore targets, including bunkers and positions in thousands of shells, forming a massive bombardment supposed to destroy defenses, soften positions, and clear the way for infantry. It worked partially with some bunkers destroyed, and some positions silenced. But many survived and waited, untouched and ready, waiting for infantry, for targets, for the slaughter to begin. Air bombardment followed with heavy bombers including B-17s and B-24s by the thousands bombing beaches and defenses, supposedly carpet bombing to destroy everything and create a safe landing. It didn't work though because cloud cover caused poor visibility, and bomb aimers delayed because they didn't want to hit the landing craft. Their bombs fell inland, behind beaches, behind defenses, completely missing targets and leaving Germans unhurt, waiting, ready. Landing craft made their final approach toward beaches, toward fire, toward death. Soldiers saw beaches through spray and through fear, as some vomited. Some prayed, some checked weapons loading rifles, fixing bayonets and preparing as best they could for the worst that was coming. Utah Beach was the westernmost beach where the 4th Infantry Division landed at 6:30 in the first waves. Strong current pushed landing craft south by 2,000 yards to an entirely wrong location, a completely wrong beach. Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt, Jr. landed with the first wave, as the oldest man landing at 56 years old, despite a heart condition. He was the son of a president who surveyed the situation, recognizing the wrong beach, but noticing it was lightly defended. He made a famous decision saying, "We'll start the war from here," choosing to improvise, adapt, and overcome. Utah succeeded relatively well with the lightest casualties of only 200 dead. They linked with airborne forces, moved inland, and secured a beachhead by afternoon and by evening in clear success. This was lucky success where the wrong landing actually helped because of lighter defenses, confused Germans, and aggressive leadership. Roosevelt's decision proved crucial, and he was awarded the Medal of Honor, though he died a month later from a heart attack. He remained a hero of Utah and a hero of D-Day. Gold Beach saw the British 50th Infantry Division land, veterans with experience from North Africa, Sicily, and Italy, now in France. They landed at 0725, an hour later than the Americans, with the tide rising and beach obstacles exposed, visible, and mostly avoidable. Naval bombardment proved effective here with many bunkers damaged or destroyed, making resistance moderate. The British advanced steadily as their training showed, and experience helped with acceptable casualties. They pushed inland toward Bayou and toward objectives, with good progress and solid success. Juno Beach belonged to the Canadians, with the 3rd Infantry Division claiming their beach and their battle as Canada's contribution. They landed at 0745 in the roughest seas and highest waves, where landing craft swamped, and some sank while approaching the beach. Obstacles were a problem with the tide higher, and obstacles submerged as craft hit them, exploded, and sank. This caused more casualties before landing than after, as naval bombardment proved less effective with bunkers intact and resistance heavy. The Canadians took heavy casualties but pressed on with courage, determination, and anger. They broke through and pushed inland in the deepest advance of the day, almost reaching Caen, though not quite. It was impressive, costly, but impressive. Sword Beach saw the British 3rd Infantry Division land as the easternmost beach and closest to Caen. Their objective was Caen itself, to capture it on the first day as a junction point and communications hub, making it a critical objective. They landed at 0725 in rough seas with obstacles and resistance similar to Juno. The British advanced steadily, linking with airborne forces at Pegasus Bridge and the Orne bridges to secure the eastern flank. But Caen presented a problem with strong defenses and German armor. The 21st Panzer Division counterattacked in the afternoon, nearly reaching the beach and nearly splitting the British forces in what was nearly a disaster. But they were stopped by naval gunfire, air support, and sheer firepower. The Germans withdrew and Caen didn't fall. Not today, not for a month. But the beachhead was secure, and that was enough for now. Omaha Beach belonged to the Americans and became the Nightmare Beach, the bloodiest beach, the most difficult, most costly, and most famous. The 1st Infantry Division, called the Big Red One, were veterans, but the 29th Infantry Division were National Guard with less experience. These were mixed forces on a difficult beach with strong defenses where everything went wrong from the start. From before the start, naval bombardment lasted only 35 minutes, which was inadequate as many bunkers remained untouched, surviving and waiting. Air bombardment missed completely with bombs falling miles inland, as defenses stayed intact, undamaged, and fully operational. The German defenders were from a good unit, the 302nd Infantry Division, not old men or foreigners, but German regulars who were experienced, well-positioned, well-led, and ready. Beach obstacles were thick, dense, and deadly with mines everywhere on stakes, hedgehogs, and gates, all mined and all covered by fire from machine guns. Artillery and mortars creating a perfect killing ground. This was prepared, fortified, and deadly terrain. The terrain favored defense completely as bluffs overlooked the beach from high ground, with a commanding view and clear fields of fire. No cover existed on the beach, just sand and shingle and death. Exit routes were few with only 5 draws, which were valleys and roads off the beach, all heavily defended with artillery pre-registered, machine guns sighted, and mortars ranged for perfect defense and a nightmare attack. Landing craft approached as German guns opened fire with artillery, mortars and machine guns raking landing craft, sinking boats and killing men before they landed, before they fought, before they had a chance. Some craft hit obstacles and exploded, disintegrated as men were thrown into water, weighted down and drowning. Others hit beaches as ramps dropped and machine guns fired, causing men to fall instantly with the first out being the first dead. Gunners targeted ramps, swept landing craft, killing everyone or trying to and nearly succeeding. Soldiers waded ashore through chest-deep water and rough surf under enemy fire as they struggled, fell, drowned, got hit, and died. Bodies floated and sank as water turned red with blood everywhere while screaming, shouting, and orders mixed with chaos. Men tried reaching shore, but many didn't. Cut down, drowned, lost, and gone. Those reaching the beach found no cover. Just sand and open beach as machine guns swept it constantly with artillery shells exploding and mortars falling. Men tried hiding behind obstacles, behind bodies, behind anything while many were wounded and couldn't move as the tide rose, drowning the wounded in horrible, slow, helpless deaths. Officers were killed along with sergeants and leaders. Basically anyone who moved, stood, or tried anything. Machine guns cut them down as units disintegrated, becoming leaderless, scattered, pinned down, taking casualties, unable to advance or retreat. They were stuck and dying as some units were nearly wiped out. Company A of the 116th Infantry, the Bedford Boys from Virginia National Guard, saw their company destroyed in the first minutes with almost all killed. This small town suffered devastating loss from one beach, one battle, and 1 hour. Tanks were supposed to help. DD tanks with duplex drive that were amphibious and meant to swim to the beach and support infantry. But seas were too rough and tanks sank as 27 of 32 sank, with drowned crews all lost. Few reached the beach, but not enough as infantry lacked support, covering fire and help. They were alone, dying alone, and failing alone. By 0800, Omaha Beach was a disaster, a catastrophe, and a complete failure. Soldiers were pinned down, taking casualties, and making no progress with no penetration. No advance, just death slowly, steadily, and remorselessly. German defenses remained intact, unbreached, and victorious as beaches were covered with dead, wounded, wrecked equipment, burning vehicles, and disabled tanks. It was a nightmare, hell, and a slaughterhouse. General Bradley watched from the USS Augusta while receiving reports. All bad. Omaha was failing with casualties mounting, and advance stalled. He considered evacuation, abandoning the beach, and redirecting forces to Utah or British beaches, anywhere but Omaha. This was disaster. Complete disaster. But soldiers didn't know about evacuation plans or about failure. They only knew they were dying while pinned down and stuck, realizing they must move or die here slowly, helplessly. Some men decided it was better to die advancing than die waiting, as small groups led by surviving officers, surviving sergeants, or surviving privates moved. Anyone had to lead toward bluffs, toward draws, toward the enemy, toward death maybe, but toward action, toward something. Bangalore torpedoes blew wire and gaps opened. Small gaps and deadly gaps, but gaps nonetheless. Men rushed through as some died, but some made it up the bluffs. It was a difficult climb under fire as they crawled, scrambled, and climbed through mines, through wire, through fire until they reached the top. Some did, few but enough, and they started shooting back with grenades into bunkers, rifles, and whatever they had. These were small victories, tiny victories, but victories nonetheless. More followed as more gaps opened. More men climbed, and more reached the top. Germans were surprised because defenders couldn't believe anyone would survive or advance or attack, but they did. Americans did it through courage, desperation, and determination. They advanced despite everything, despite casualties, despite hell. They advanced because the alternative was death. And if you're dying anyway, then die moving forward, die fighting. Die doing something. Destroyers helped as Navy destroyers came close. Dangerously close in shallow water, while risking grounding to help and support. They fired at point-blank range, at bunkers, at positions, at anything German. This naval gunfire made a difference by destroying bunkers, suppressing fire, and helping infantry. It gave them a chance, a small chance, but a chance that they took and used to press forward. By noon, the situation improved slightly, with some draws penetrated, some bluffs scaled, and some bunkers cleared. They hadn't broken through or succeeded, but they weren't failing or facing disaster or needing evacuation. This was progress, slow, painful, and bloody, but progress nonetheless. Men kept coming as wave after wave landed with more landing craft, more soldiers, and more equipment piling up on the beach. It was chaos and casualties, but also reinforcements building combat power slowly and eventually enough. By evening, the beachhead was secured. Barely, with a small penetration maybe a mile deep and 2 miles wide, making it a tenuous hold and fragile foothold, but a hold nonetheless. They were surviving, expanding, and the Germans couldn't throw them off or drive them back or destroy them despite trying. They counterattacked and failed as Americans stayed, held, and won barely, costly, but won. Casualties on Omaha were terrible, with 2,000 or maybe 3,000 dead, wounded and missing as the highest of any beach by far. But the beachhead was established and mission accomplished, barely and bloodily, but accomplished. Omaha held, Americans stayed, and the invasion succeeded despite everything, despite Omaha, and because of Omaha. Because men there refused to fail, refused to retreat, and refused to die uselessly. Instead, fighting, bleeding, dying, and winning. By the end of June 6th, all 5 beaches were secured and beachheads established, with over 150,000 Allied troops ashore. More were landing continuously through the night, the next day, and following days as supplies flowed. Equipment landed, armies built, and power accumulated. This was overwhelming power that Germany couldn't match, couldn't stop, and couldn't defeat. The German response was confused, delayed, and inadequate. Hitler was sleeping on the morning of June 6th, as his staff refused to wake him. Reports arrived about the Normandy landing at large scale, but staff debated whether to wake Hitler and request panzer release. They hesitated and waited, wasting precious hours. Hitler woke at noon and learned of the invasion, but didn't believe it, thinking it was a feint, with the real invasion still coming at Calais. He refused to release panzers, delayed and dithered, deciding slowly and too slowly. By evening he authorized release, but it was too late. The beaches were secured, beachheads established, and panzers marched but slowly. Allied air power attacked, strafed, bombed, delayed, and disrupted them. Days passed before arriving, and those were wasted days. Fatal days. Rommel was away on June 6th for his wife's birthday, having gone to Germany bringing a present and visiting Hitler to request panzers, reinforcements, and authority. News reached him about the invasion in Normandy, and he rushed back on June 7th, but it was too late. Critical hours were lost and beaches were secure. He toured defenses and saw disaster, with beach defenses breached, panzers scattered, and counterattacks failing. The Atlantic Wall was broken, and he knew Germany had lost. They lost here today on June 6th, losing the invasion and losing the war. Everything after would be delay, retreat, and defeat. He knew it, told staff and commanders they must make peace, negotiate, and end the war before Germany was destroyed, and before more died pointlessly. He was right but ignored. Hitler wouldn't negotiate, wouldn't surrender, and wouldn't admit defeat, fighting on to the end, to apocalypse, to Berlin. Rommel tried, survived Normandy, but died in October from forced suicide, after being suspected in the Hitler plot. Different story, different tragedy. Why did D-Day succeed? There were multiple factors starting with overwhelming force. The Allies concentrated armies with massive power, while Germany was divided, fighting Russia, fighting Italy, and defending everywhere while being strong nowhere. They couldn't match Allied strength at the invasion point, where local superiority was total, crushing, and decisive. Air supremacy was critical, as the Luftwaffe was destroyed mostly with few aircraft available. Allied air forces dominated, bombed at will, supported invasion, prevented reinforcement, and disrupted German response. This was a critical advantage, an essential advantage, and a victory-enabling advantage. Naval supremacy helped as Allied navies controlled the Channel and controlled the seas. The German Navy was broken, with the Kriegsmarine having no surface fleet. Submarines tried attacking but mostly failed as Allied destroyers and aircraft protected the invasion fleet, allowed massive buildup, continuous supply, and sustained offensive. Germany couldn't prevent it, disrupt it, or stop it. Intelligence through Ultra and Enigma decrypts allowed Allied codebreakers to read German messages. No German dispositions, German plans, and German confusion. Fortitude worked as Germans believed Calais, and kept forces there even after Normandy, dividing strength in a fatal division. Leadership was key with Eisenhower, Montgomery and Bradley being competent, professional, and cooperative. Coalition warfare is difficult with egos clashing and national interests conflicting, but they cooperated, worked together, and achieved unity of command, unity of purpose, and unity that was essential for success. Planning involved years of detailed, comprehensive consideration of everything, including logistics, supply, beaches, defenses, weather, and tides. Not everything went right, as Omaha proved, but planning helped by providing framework, enabling adaptation, and enabling success. Courage mattered greatly, from soldiers on beaches, to paratroopers in darkness, to sailors on ships, to airmen in aircraft. Courage existed at every level for everyone, as they faced death, faced fear, and faced impossible odds. They advanced anyway, fought anyway, and won anyway. Courage made the difference, the decisive difference, the human difference. Luck played a role with weather. Rommel absent, Hitler sleeping, and panzers delayed. Paratroops scattered but remained effective, and the wrong landing at Utah actually helped. Everything broke right for the Allies on this day, this battle, this invasion. Call it luck, providence, or destiny, but whatever you call it, it worked and they won. German failures contributed through divided command, Hitler's interference, delayed response, and inadequate reserves. They had second-rate troops, an incomplete Atlantic wall, and disputed defensive doctrine. Everything worked against Germany, guaranteed defeat, made victory possible, and made D-Day succeed. The heroes of D-Day are countless, starting with soldiers on Omaha advancing under fire, dying by dozens and hundreds but still advancing, still fighting and still winning. They were heroes, everyone, especially those who died, who gave everything, gave their future, gave their lives for the mission, for their country, and for each other. Paratroopers behind lines were scattered, lost, confused, but still rallying, fighting, and accomplishing missions against odds through improvisation and courage. This was small unit leadership at its finest, with private soldiers becoming leaders, corporals commanding companies, and everyone doing everything. whatever was needed. They were heroes, professionals, and warriors. Navy gunners and destroyer captains risked their ships while saving soldiers by providing fire support, close support, dangerous support, but effective and critical support. They were heroes too, less celebrated but equally important and equally brave. Air crews, including bomber pilots, fighter pilots, and transport pilots, flew missions supporting invasion while facing flak. Some were shot down, killed, and went missing, but missions were flown, support provided, and air supremacy maintained. They were heroes in the sky, enabling heroes on the ground. Engineers cleared beach obstacles under fire, and removed mines under fire while building roads under fire. Doing everything under fire with high casualties but essential missions. Without engineers, the beaches stay blocked, forces stay pinned, and invasion fails. Engineers succeeded and invasion succeeded. They were heroes, unsung but essential. Medics and corpsmen treated the wounded under fire on beaches while exposed and vulnerable, protected only by a Red Cross and sometimes not even that. Germans sometimes shot medics as a war crime, but a reality nonetheless. Medics worked anyway, saved lives by the hundreds and thousands. They were heroes, lifesavers, angels of the battlefield, and planners including staff officers, logistics officers, supply sergeants, and quartermasters loaded ships, organized supplies, and planned movements. It wasn't glamorous or celebrated, but it was essential. Because without logistics, armies don't move, don't fight, and don't win. D-Day needed logistics, massive logistics and complex logistics where someone planned it, organized it, and executed it. They were heroes too, a different kind but equally important. After D-Day, the war continued with breakout from Normandy and Operation Cobra during late July, bringing American breakthrough. Patton was unleashed as Third Army raced across France in the liberation. Paris fell on August 25th, followed by Belgium and Holland, as they reached the German border. But Germany fought with desperate fanaticism as Market Garden failed in September at Arnhem with its bridge too far. The Battle of the Bulge came in December as Germany's last offensive in the West, where Hitler gambled everything on one desperate attack through the Ardennes. It was winter with snow, fog, and frozen ground, as three German armies attacked with surprise and initial success. They pushed deep into American lines, creating a bulge in the front, hence the name. For a week it looked dangerous as Americans were pushed back, surrounded at Bastogne, and threatened with breakthrough. But the weather cleared on December 23rd, allowing Allied air power to strike. Patton's Third Army relieved Bastogne on December 26th, and German offensive stalled, stopped, and reversed. By January, the Bulge was eliminated and German forces destroyed. Germany had gambled their last reserves, their last fuel, and their last hope on the offensive, and it failed. After the Bulge, Germany could only defend and retreat, and die because they had nothing left. The Rhine was crossed in March 1945 at Remagen, where American troops captured the Ludendorff Bridge intact before Germans could destroy it. This was incredible luck and a strategic breakthrough as thousands of American troops poured across the Rhine into Germany's heartland. More crossings followed as the Rhine barrier was breached everywhere, and Allied armies flooded into Germany from west and east. The link-up with Soviet forces came at Torgau on the Elbe River on April 25, 1945, where American and Russian soldiers met and shook hands. Germany was cut in half, divided and dying. Hitler killed himself on April 30th in his Berlin bunker, as Soviet troops were blocks away. Germany surrendered on May 7th, with unconditional surrender taking effect on May 8, 1945, as Victory in Europe Day. The war in Europe was over after 5 years and 8 months of fighting. 60 million people were dead, including soldiers and civilians, from combat, from bombing, from starvation, from Holocaust, from everything. Cities were destroyed, nations were ruined, and Europe was devastated with trauma that would last for generations. But it was over, and evil was defeated. Hitler was dead, Nazism was destroyed, the Holocaust was ended, concentration camps were liberated, survivors were freed, and evil was vanquished. The cost was immense and terrible, but the victory was necessary and just. D-Day made it all possible, because the Second Front in France forced Germany to fight on two fronts simultaneously. They couldn't concentrate forces against Russia anymore, and couldn't win against combined Allied power. The outcome became inevitable from June 6, 1944 forward, because Germany was being crushed between two massive armies from east and west. They fought hard and died by millions but couldn't win or even survive because the mathematics of war were against them. The geography was against them, and industrial capacity was overwhelmingly against them. D-Day was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, and it happened on those 5 beaches in Normandy, where over 150,000 men landed on one day. Over 4,000 died on that day, with many more wounded, missing, or captured. But they established the foothold that became a beachhead, that became a breakout, that became liberation, that became victory. The casualties tell the story of sacrifice and cost. American forces lost approximately 2,500 dead on D-Day, with most of those on Omaha Beach. British forces lost around 1,000 dead, with Canadian forces losing 350 dead. Total Allied casualties were around 10,000, including dead, wounded, and missing on just the first day. German casualties are harder to calculate, with estimates ranging from 4,000 to 9,000 dead, wounded, and captured as record-keeping collapsed in the chaos. But numbers don't capture the reality, because every number represents a person, a life, a future lost. Young men who would never go home, never marry, never have children, never grow old. They died on those beaches or in those fields or in that sky and stayed there forever. Some have graves, some have memorials, and some have nothing because their bodies were never recovered. Lost in the channel, or buried in rubble, or simply gone, the survivors carried memories for the rest of their lives, with some talking about their experiences, while others never spoke of it at all. The trauma was deep and lasting, as they watched friends die, killed enemy soldiers, and saw horrors that couldn't be forgotten or unseen. Many suffered what we now call PTSD, but was then called shell shock or battle fatigue, or just not discussed. They suffered in silence, coped as best they could, and lived with their memories until death finally brought peace. The French people suffered too, because Normandy became a battlefield where towns were destroyed and civilians were killed in the crossfire. Cadian was devastated by bombing and shelling, with 75% of the city destroyed and thousands of civilians dead. Many French people welcomed liberation, but paid a terrible price for freedom, because war is never clean or surgical or precise, and innocent people die alongside soldiers in battles they didn't start or want. But liberation came, and freedom was restored. France was freed from Nazi occupation after 4 years of darkness, humiliation, and terror. The French resistance fought bravely throughout the occupation, sabotaging German operations, helping Allied airmen escape, gathering intelligence, and preparing for liberation. On D-Day, they rose up across France, cutting rail lines, ambushing German convoys, and creating chaos behind enemy lines. Their contribution was significant, and their courage was immense, because the penalty for resistance was torture and execution. Yet they fought anyway, because freedom mattered more than safety. The strategic impact of D-Day extended far beyond the immediate battlefield, because it demonstrated Allied unity and capability. America, Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations cooperated in the largest amphibious operation in history. proving that coalition warfare could work when nations shared common purpose and subordinated individual interests to collective goals. That cooperation continued through the end of the war and became the foundation for NATO and the post-war alliance that kept peace in Europe for decades. D-Day also demonstrated the importance of air and naval power in modern warfare, because without air supremacy and naval supremacy, the invasion would have failed. The lesson was learned by military planners worldwide, and future amphibious operations always emphasized gaining control of air and sea before attempting to land forces on hostile shores. The Pacific War applied these lessons at Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and other operations where air and naval bombardment preceded landings to suppress defenses and enable success. The technology developed for D-Day influenced post-war military development because specialized landing craft, amphibious vehicles, and portable harbors all emerged from D-Day planning. The Mulberry harbors were artificial harbors towed across the Channel and assembled off Normandy beaches to enable rapid supply delivery before ports could be captured. They were engineering marvels that allowed the Allies to sustain armies in France during the critical first weeks. Similar concepts influenced modern military logistics and expeditionary operations. The intelligence operations around D-Day, including ultra-code breaking and fortitude deception, became case studies in military intelligence and deception operations. The success of fortitude in convincing Germans that Calais was the real target showed how effective deception could multiply military force and achieve strategic surprise. Modern military operations still employ deception and information warfare as force multipliers. Building on lessons learned from D-Day planning, the human cost of D-Day reminds us that freedom isn't free and that the world we inhabit was purchased with blood and sacrifice by people who believed in something larger than themselves. The men who landed on those beaches weren't professional soldiers mostly. They were farmers, factory workers, students, shop clerks, ordinary people who answered their nation's call and did extraordinary things. They didn't want to be heroes, and many didn't feel like heroes afterward. They just did their duty as they understood it and hoped to survive to go home. But their actions changed history and shaped our world, because without D-Day, there would have been no liberation of Western Europe, no restoration of democracy, no defeat of Nazism from the West. The Soviet Union would have eventually conquered Germany from the East, but a Soviet-dominated Europe would have been very different from the Europe that emerged after the war. D-Day ensured that Western Europe remained free and democratic, and that matters tremendously for the world we live in today. The beaches of Normandy today are peaceful and quiet, with the sand washed clean and the obstacles removed. Tourists walk where soldiers died, taking photographs, reading plaques, trying to imagine what happened here. The Norman American Cemetery overlooks Omaha Beach with 9,000 white crosses and stars of David marking graves of Americans who died in Normandy. It's beautiful and peaceful and heartbreaking because each grave represents a life cut short, a family destroyed, a future lost. Similar cemeteries exist for British and Canadian forces at Bayeux, for German forces at Le Cam, all peaceful now, all honored now, all remembered. Former enemies lie in earth they fought over, resting finally after decades of peace that they helped create through their sacrifice. June 6 is remembered every year, with ceremonies at the beaches and cemeteries, where veterans attended while they were still alive. Fewer each year as time took its toll. The last veterans are in their 90s and hundreds now, and soon there will be none left who remember D-Day from personal experience. Their memories will fade into history, recorded in books and films and monuments, but no longer lived and felt. That makes it more important than ever to remember and honor what they did, because D-Day was one of history's pivotal moments, when the outcome of World War II hung in the balance. If D-Day had failed, if the invasion had been thrown back into the sea, the war would have continued for years longer, with millions more dead and outcomes uncertain. But D-Day succeeded through courage, sacrifice, planning, and luck. And that success changed everything. This is the story of D-Day, June 6, 1944, when 150,000 Allied troops landed on 5 beaches in Normandy to begin the liberation of Europe, when the Atlantic Wall was breached and Nazi Germany's fate was sealed, when ordinary men did extraordinary things and changed the course of history, when courage met chaos on bloody beaches and courage won. Remember them, all of them, the ones who died and the ones who survived. Remember what they did and what they sacrificed and what they achieved. Remember the Americans on Omaha Beach advancing through hell, because retreat meant death, and surrender meant failure. Remember the paratroopers dropping into darkness behind enemy lines to secure the flanks and enable success. Remember the British and Canadians on Gold, Juno, and Sword pushing inland against determined resistance. Remember the sailors bringing them across the channel through rough seas and enemy fire. Remember the pilots providing air cover and bombing support despite flak and fighters. Remember the planners and logistics officers and engineers and medics and everyone who contributed to the invasion's success. Remember them because they were heroes, not because they wanted to be, but because circumstances demanded it, and they rose to meet the demand. They were scared and many died, and most would have preferred to be home safe with their families. But duty called, and they answered. They fought not for glory or conquest, but for freedom and justice in defeating evil. They succeeded, though the cost was terrible, and the world they saved is the world we inhabit today. D-Day was the longest day, a day that lasted years in memory for those who survived it. A day when everything hung in balance and could have gone either way. Day when men stormed beaches under fire and climbed bluffs under fire, and cleared bunkers under fire, and died under fire. A day when courage mattered more than firepower, and determination mattered more than numbers. A day when Allied forces proved they could work together and defeat a powerful enemy on his own ground. A day that changed the war and changed the world. This is D-Day. This is the invasion of Normandy. This is the day the liberation began. This is June 6, 1944. This is the longest day. Remember it, honor it, and never forget the price that was paid for the freedom we enjoy today. They gave everything so we could have everything. Their sacrifice echoes across the decades, reminding us that freedom is never guaranteed and must sometimes be purchased with blood. The beaches of Normandy bear witness to that truth, and the men who died there deserve our eternal gratitude and remembrance. This is their story. This is D-Day. This is the day that changed everything. Remember them. Honor them, always.